Black Widow took in. Starving Comanche triplets. Their warrior father never knew she would change his life. "You can't keep feeding strays," the sheriff snarls, as the weathered black woman kneels in desert dust, pressing bread into the trembling hands of 3 dying boys. The frontier town whispers she's cursed. Husband vanished mysteriously. Store failing, destined for the unmarked graves that claim forgotten women. But these children carry secrets in ancient symbols only they can read. Secrets that could unlock fortunes buried in her barren land. Miles away, a fierce Comanche warrior follows cold trails and bitter rumors, hunting for the sons he abandoned to save. Neither the widow nor the father knows their collision will expose a conspiracy that has stolen from both their peoples. Will her desperate act of mercy become the key to justice, or will it destroy the last hope for both their worlds? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on Bitter Creek as Miriam Solomon swept the dust from her empty general store. Another day without customers. Another day closer to losing everything. She had grown accustomed to the whispers that followed her through town, the sideways glances, the way conversations stopped when she approached. 2 years since her husband Thomas disappeared without a trace, and still they treated her like a plague carrier. Sheriff McClure's heavy boots announced his arrival before she saw him. He filled her doorway like a storm cloud, his badge catching the harsh light. "Mrs. Solomon." His voice carried the weight of authority and something darker. "Time we had another talk." Miriam straightened her shoulders. She had learned not to show fear in front of men like McClure. "About what, Sheriff?" "About you moving on, finding somewhere more suitable for a woman in your position." Her position. A widow with dark skin in a town that barely tolerated her existence. McClure never said the words directly, but his meaning hung in the air like smoke. "This is my home, my store." McClure stepped inside uninvited. His eyes swept over the near-empty shelves, the unpaid bills stacked on her counter. Store's failing. Everyone can see it. Maybe it's time to accept reality. Reality. The same word the town council used when they suggested she sell her property for a fraction of its value. The same word her few remaining customers used when they explained why they couldn't shop there anymore. After McClure left, Miriam retreated to the back room where Thomas had kept his papers. She pulled out the wooden box containing documents written in Spanish and covered with strange symbols she couldn't decipher. Thomas had been secretive about these papers, claiming they were important, but never explaining why. She traced the unfamiliar markings with her finger. If only she could understand what Thomas had been trying to tell her. The sound of rustling behind her store interrupted her thoughts. Probably another stray dog looking for scraps. She had little enough to spare, but something pulled her outside. 3 small figures huddled against the back wall of her building. Children. Boys, she realized. Their clothes torn and faces gaunt with hunger. Their dark skin and long black hair marked them as Comanche. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10 years old. His eyes met hers with a mixture of defiance and desperation. The 2 younger boys pressed close to their brother, trembling from more than just the desert heat. Miriam had seen that look before. In her own mirror years ago, when she was young and hungry and alone. Before Thomas found her and gave her a chance at something better. She knelt slowly, keeping her movements gentle. The boys tensed like wild animals ready to bolt. "You're hungry?" It wasn't a question. The oldest boy nodded once, his pride warring with his need. Miriam disappeared into her store and returned with bread and water. She set the food on the ground between them and stepped back. The boys fell on it like they hadn't eaten in days. "What are your names?" The oldest boy swallowed hard. "Ayana. These are my brothers, Kame and Tala." His English was broken but clear enough. Someone had taught him the basics. "Where are your parents?" Pain flashed across Ayana's face. "Father is warrior, Thunderhawk. He left us near town. Said we find safety." Miriam felt her heart clench. A father desperate enough to abandon his children, hoping strangers would show more mercy than the wilderness. She made her decision before her rational mind could stop her. "Come inside." By evening, word had spread through Bitter Creek like wildfire. The Black Widow had taken in 3 Comanche boys. The town's reaction was swift and predictable. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house appeared at her door first. "Miriam, you can't be serious about keeping those children. They're hungry and alone. They're savages." The word hung between them like a slap. Mrs. Henderson's face showed no shame, only the cold certainty of someone who had never questioned her own righteousness. More visitors followed, the baker, the postmaster, each one carrying the same message wrapped in different words. Get rid of the boys or face the consequences. By the next morning, even her few loyal customers had stopped coming. The unofficial boycott was complete. Sheriff McClure returned that afternoon, his expression grim with purpose. "I warned you about causing trouble, Mrs. Solomon. Feeding hungry children isn't trouble. Harboring runaways is." McClure's hand rested on his gun belt. "Town council met this morning. You have 1 week to remove those boys, or we'll remove them for you. And then what? Turn them out to starve? That's not our concern." After McClure left, Miriam found the boys in her back room, huddled over Thomas's old papers. Her breath caught when she saw Ayanna tracing the Spanish text with his finger, his lips moving silently. "You can read this?" Ayanna looked up, startled. "Some. Grandmother taught us before she died. She was taken by Spanish soldiers long ago before she joined our people." Miriam's pulse quickened. "What does it say?" The boy's finger moved across the page. "Something about water rights and minerals in the ground." The words hit Miriam like lightning. Water rights. Mineral claims. Thomas hadn't been keeping random papers. He had been documenting something valuable, something worth hiding, something worth killing for. The boycott hit harder than Miriam expected. 3 days without a single customer. Her meager savings dwindled to nothing. The boys ate her last can of beans while she pretended she wasn't hungry. McClure appeared at dawn on the 4th day, flanked by 2 town council members. Their faces carried the satisfaction of men who believed justice was on their side. "Time's up, Mrs. Solomon." Miriam stepped onto her porch, blocking their path to the boys inside. "They're just children. They're not our children." Councilman Harris adjusted his spectacles with the air of a man delivering a sermon. "This town has enough problems without adding more. You have until sunset." McClure's voice carried finality. "After that, we'll handle this ourselves." That afternoon, someone threw a rock through her front window. The message attached was brief. "Last warning." Miriam swept up the glass while the boys watched from the corner. Fear had crept into their eyes, the same haunted look she remembered from her own childhood. She had sworn never to let children feel that helpless again, but she was failing them just like everyone else. That evening, she spread Thomas's papers across her kitchen table. The boys gathered around her, their small faces serious in the lamplight. "Show me what else you can read." Ayanna's finger traced the Spanish text slowly. "This paper talks about a spring, sacred water that heals sickness." Kimi, the middle boy, pointed to a series of symbols. "These marks show where the water flows underground." Tala, the youngest, surprised her by speaking for the first time. Grandmother said the water runs beneath the dry places, like veins in the earth. Miriam studied the documents with new eyes. Thomas had been mapping something, not just land boundaries, but water sources and mineral deposits. Her property wasn't worthless desert. It was sitting on top of a fortune. But why had Thomas kept this secret? And why had he disappeared before he could act on it? The next morning brought Sheriff McClure and 4 armed men. Miriam met them at her door, her spine straight despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. "You made your choice, Mrs. Solomon." "Wait." She disappeared inside and returned with one of Thomas's documents. Her hands shook slightly as she unfolded it. "This is a legal claim to water rights, filed by my late husband." She had spent the night teaching herself to read the Spanish text with the boys' help. "According to territorial law, these rights transfer to his widow." McClure barely glanced at the paper. That foreign scribbling doesn't mean anything here. Spanish colonial law is still recognized by territorial courts. Not in my town. McClure stepped forward, but Ayanna appeared beside Miriam. The boy held another document, this one covered in official seals. This paper says the water belongs to the people who knew where to find it first. Ayanna's English had improved remarkably in just a few days. My grandmother's people marked these places long before any settlers came. The sheriff's face darkened. Boy, you best learn to keep quiet. He can read legal documents in 3 languages. Miriam's voice carried a strength she didn't know she possessed. Can you? For the first time, uncertainty flickered in McClure's eyes. He snatched the papers from Miriam's hands and studied them. The Spanish text might as well have been hieroglyphics to him. These could say anything. File a complaint with the territorial courthouse in Tucson. Miriam held his gaze. Let a judge decide. McClure's jaw tightened, but he folded the papers and handed them back. This isn't over. After the men left, Miriam sank into her chair, her legs suddenly weak. The boys gathered around her, their faces bright with something she hadn't seen before. Hope. That afternoon, she began teaching them to read English properly. They absorbed knowledge like desert sand soaking up rain. Ayanna mastered arithmetic in hours. Keme showed her how the pictographs corresponded to geographic features. Tala revealed a memory so precise he could recite entire conversations word for word. Where did you learn all this? Grandmother was captured when she was young. Ayanna's voice grew soft with memory. Spanish priests taught her to read their books. She taught us everything before the sickness took her. She said knowledge was the only thing that could never be stolen from us, Keme added. Miriam felt pieces clicking into place. Thomas's papers weren't just legal documents. They were a puzzle that required multiple languages and cultures to solve. He had been working with someone who understood both Spanish colonial law and Comanche territorial knowledge. Someone like the boy's grandmother. That evening, she spread out a territorial map and compared it to Thomas's markings. The boys pointed out features invisible to her untrained eye, stream beds that only flowed during certain seasons, rocky outcroppings that indicated underground minerals, sacred sites that marked natural boundaries. Your husband was a good man. Ayanna traced a line on the map. Grandmother said he promised to protect our people's rights to the water. You knew Thomas? Not me, but grandmother spoke of him. She said he was different from the others. He listened instead of just taking. Miriam stared at the map, understanding flooding through her. Thomas hadn't been working alone. He had been building something. A partnership between 2 peoples, 2 ways of understanding the land. And someone had killed him for it. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Thomas hadn't disappeared. He had been murdered by someone who knew exactly what he was trying to accomplish. Someone who wanted the land for themselves. The Comanche warrior arrived like a storm at sunset. Miriam first noticed him from her window, a lone figure on horseback silhouetted against the red sky. Even from a distance, his presence commanded attention. The boys sensed him before they saw him. Ayanna straightened suddenly while helping with dinner. Keme dropped his slate and pencil. Tala ran to the window, his face pressed against the glass. Father comes. The man who dismounted in front of her store was not what Miriam had expected, tall and lean with graying hair braided with leather and silver. His clothes mixed traditional and settler styles. His eyes held the weight of someone who had seen too much loss. He studied her store, taking in the boarded window and the emptiness within. His gaze settled on Miriam as she stepped onto the porch. You are the woman who took my sons. His English carried only the slightest accent. This was a man who had learned to move between worlds. I am Miriam Solomon. Chayton. He inclined his head slightly. Thunderhawk, as the boys know me. The 3 children appeared behind Miriam, no longer the starving waif she had found. They stood straight and proud, their eyes bright with health and learning. Chayton's expression softened for just a moment. Relief flickered across his features before the warrior mask returned. "You will return them now. Ask them what they want." Chaitin's eyes narrowed, but he looked at his sons. Ayana stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Comanche. His brothers joined in, their voices overlapping as they told their story. Miriam watched Chaitin's face change as he listened. Surprise replaced suspicion. His rigid posture relaxed slightly. "They say you have taught them to read the white man's papers." "They taught me to read yours." Chaitin studied her with new interest. "What papers?" Miriam disappeared inside and returned with Thomas's documents. She spread them on the porch table, watching Chaitin's reaction. His intake of breath was sharp. "Where did you get these?" "My husband was working on them before he died." Chaitin traced one of the pictographs with reverence. "This is my mother's mark. She was wise woman, keeper of the water knowledge." "The boy's grandmother?" "Yes." Chaitin looked up sharply. "Your husband knew her?" "They were partners, working to protect both your people's water rights and settler claims." Chaitin's expression darkened. "The sheriff did not like this partnership. You know McClure? He has been stealing from tribal lands for years, taking what he wants, forging papers to make it legal." Chaitin's voice carried bitter experience. "Your husband threatened his operation." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. McClure hadn't just wanted Thomas gone. He had needed him dead. "Is that why you left the boys near town? You knew Thomas was helping your people?" Chaitin nodded slowly. "I heard he was killed, but I hoped his widow might honor his promises. I didn't know what the promises were until your sons translated the documents." For the first time, Chaitin smiled. It transformed his weathered features completely. "My mother would be proud. She always said the children would carry her wisdom forward." Over dinner, the full story emerged. Chaitin's tribe had been systematically pushed off their ancestral lands through forged documents and false treaties. Thomas had been documenting the real boundaries, the legitimate water rights, the mineral claims that belonged to both peoples under territorial law. My mother spent months teaching him our ways of reading the land. Chaitin accepted a second helping of Miriam's stew. She said he was the first white man who truly listened. Then why did she agree to help? Because she saw what was coming. The tribes will disappear unless we find new ways to survive. Education, legal knowledge, partnership instead of war. Ayana looked up from his meal. "Grandmother said the water belongs to everyone who needs it, but only some people try to own it for themselves." "Smart woman." Miriam refilled Chaitin's coffee cup. "What happened to make you leave the boys?" Chaitin's face grew grave. "Military patrol found our camp, accused us of stealing cattle. We had to scatter into the mountains. No food, no shelter. Winter was coming. So you brought them here hoping someone would care for them." "I brought them here hoping Thomas's widow had his heart." That night, Chaitin agreed to stay in the store's back room. The boys insisted he hear their evening lessons. They read from primers in English, solved arithmetic problems, and recited the territorial laws they had memorized. They learn fast. Chaitin watched his sons with obvious pride. "They're remarkable children. They are my mother's legacy, and now yours as well." The words carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Chaitin was acknowledging something that went deeper than temporary guardianship. The next morning brought troubling news. Mrs. Henderson stopped by early, her face flushed with excitement. "Miriam, you need to know. There are surveyors in town, government men asking questions about property lines and water rights." "What kind of questions?" "They're looking for documentation, legal claims to the springs east of town." Miriam felt ice form in her stomach. "Who hired them?" "Sheriff McClure. Says he's found irregularities in the territorial records." After Mrs. Henderson left, Miriam shared the news with Chaitin. His reaction was immediate and grim. "He knows we have the real documents. He's trying to establish false claims before we can file legal challenges." "Can he do that?" "If no one stops him." That afternoon, strange things began happening. Their water well was found contaminated with debris. Someone tried to break into the store during the night. Surveying stakes appeared on Miriam's property without her permission. We're running out of time. Chayton stood guard at the window as evening approached. McClure is moving faster than I expected. Then we move faster. The surveyor's equipment disappeared overnight. Miriam discovered the vandalism at dawn when she found the broken instruments scattered behind her store. Someone had smashed the expensive tools with deliberate precision. This makes no sense. Chayton examined the wreckage. Why would McClure destroy his own equipment? Maybe he didn't. The sheriff arrived within the hour, his face twisted with rage. He surveyed the damage like a man personally wronged. Looks like your Indian friends don't appreciate progress, Mrs. Solomon. Chayton was with me all night. I wasn't talking about him. McClure's eyes swept the horizon. Plenty of savages in these parts who'd love to cause trouble. But something in his voice rang false. The anger seemed performed rather than genuine. That afternoon, Miriam made a discovery that changed everything. While organizing Thomas's remaining papers, she found letters hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The correspondence was addressed to someone named Martinez in Tucson. Chayton, look at this. The letters detailed Thomas's investigation into fraudulent land sales. He had documented a network of corruption stretching across 3 counties. Forged deeds, falsified mineral surveys, tribal lands sold to speculators who had never legally acquired them. Your husband was building a case against McClure's entire operation. Chayton's finger traced a list of names. These are all known land grabbers. The final letter was the most damning. Thomas had scheduled a meeting with territorial authorities. He planned to present evidence that would have sent McClure to prison. The letter was dated 3 days before Thomas disappeared. He was murdered. Miriam's voice was barely a whisper, and McClure made it look like he just wandered off into the desert. Ayanna appeared at their shoulders, studying the papers with the intensity of a scholar twice his age. Father, this name here, Martinez. Grandmother mentioned him. What did she say? He was a judge in the territorial court, one of the few who couldn't be bought. Miriam felt hope flicker to life. If Thomas had been working with an honest judge, there might still be a chance for justice. We need to get these letters to Tucson. That's a 3-day ride. Chayton glanced toward the window where evening shadows were growing longer. McClure won't let us leave town. As if summoned by their words, the sheriff appeared at their door. This time he brought the entire town council with him. Mrs. Solomon, we need to discuss your recent activities. Miriam stepped onto the porch, Chayton flanking her right side. The boys gathered behind them, a united front against the growing darkness. What activities? Councilman Harris cleared his throat officiously. Harboring known fugitives, interfering with official territorial surveys, destroying government property. Those are serious accusations, serious enough to warrant immediate action. McClure's hand rested on his gun. You and your friends need to come with us. On what authority? McClure produced a document with an official seal. Territorial warrant for questioning in connection with recent crimes. Miriam scanned the paper quickly. The legal language was dense, but the boys had taught her enough to spot the problems. This warrant is for someone named Mary Solomon. Clerical error. And it's dated tomorrow. McClure's jaw tightened. Mistakes happen. Convenient mistakes. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Miriam could feel the town council's unease. They had expected easy compliance, not legal challenges. You have until morning to produce proper documentation. Miriam folded the fraudulent warrant and handed it back. Until then, we're staying put. After the men left, Chayton barred the door and checked the windows. They'll be back, probably before dawn. Then we leave tonight. All of us? Miriam looked at the boys who were listening intently despite their youth. Running would mean abandoning everything she had built, but staying might mean losing the chance to expose the truth. We go together or not at all. They spent the evening preparing for the journey. Miriam packed the most important documents in a waterproof satchel. Chayton gathered supplies and weapons. The boys memorized key passages from the letters in case the originals were lost. If something happens to the papers, you three are the only witnesses to what they contained. Miriam knelt to their eye level. That's a heavy responsibility. We understand. Ayana's voice carried the gravity of someone far older. Grandmother always said memory is the strongest safe. Just before midnight, they slipped out through the store's back entrance. Chayton had scouted a route that avoided the main roads and McClure's likely patrol patterns. But as they reached the edge of town, torches flared to life around them. Armed men emerged from the shadows, cutting off every escape route. McClure stepped into the circle of light, his face triumphant in the flickering glow. Going somewhere, Mrs. Solomon? They had walked directly into a trap. McClure had anticipated their every move. Smart thinking trying to run, the sheriff's voice carried mock admiration. But not smart enough. Miriam felt the weight of defeat settling on her shoulders. The evidence that could expose McClure's crimes was hidden in her satchel, useless if they couldn't reach Tucson. Then Tala stepped forward, the youngest and quietest of the boys. Sheriff, you made a mistake. McClure laughed. What mistake is that, boy? You assumed we were running away. Tala's voice was steady and clear. We were running toward something. Before McClure could respond, new torches appeared on the surrounding hills. Riders descended toward the town, their numbers growing with each passing moment. Chayton's face broke into a fierce grin. My people received my message. The trap had become a confrontation, and McClure suddenly found himself outnumbered. The Comanche warriors formed a circle around McClure's men, but they made no aggressive moves. They simply sat their horses in silence, watching and waiting. The message was clear without a word being spoken. McClure's confidence wavered as he counted the riders. 20 men against his 6. The math was not in his favor. This is still my jurisdiction. Actually, it's not. Miriam pulled out one of Thomas's documents, this one bearing territorial seals. According to this survey, we're standing on unceded tribal land. Ayana stepped beside her, his young voice cutting through the tension. The boundary runs along that ridge there. Your town ends a quarter-mile back. McClure snatched the document, squinting at it in the torchlight. His illiteracy had never been more obvious or costly. This could say anything. It says you have no authority here. Chayton's voice carried quiet authority. But we're willing to discuss terms. What terms? Safe passage to Tucson, for all of us. And if I refuse? The warriors shifted slightly on their horses, still no weapons drawn, but the implication was unmistakable. Then we wait for dawn and let the territorial authorities sort this out. Chayton gestured toward one of his men. My cousin left for the capital yesterday. Should return with federal marshals by tomorrow afternoon. McClure's face went pale. Federal involvement meant scrutiny he couldn't control or bribe. You're bluffing. Are you willing to bet your career on that? The standoff stretched through the long night. McClure's men grew restless, muttering among themselves. The Comanche warriors remained motionless as statues, patient as the desert itself. At dawn, Miriam made her move. She stepped into the center of the circle, her voice carrying across the gathered men. Sheriff McClure murdered my husband. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Even McClure's own men shifted uncomfortably. That's a serious charge, Mrs. Solomon. Councilman Harris's voice shook slightly. Thomas was gathering evidence of land fraud. McClure killed him to protect his criminal operation. You have no proof. Miriam held up the letters they had found. I have his correspondence with Judge Martinez. Plans to expose the entire network. Letters can be forged. Not these. Keme stepped forward, his young face serious beyond his years. We can prove they're real. The boy began reciting passages from memory, his voice clear and precise. Details about specific land parcels, names and dates. Information that would have been impossible to fabricate. Tala joined his brother, adding more evidence from the documents. Their perfect recall stunned even McClure's supporters. Children can be coached. Not in 3 languages. Ayana switched fluidly between English, Spanish, and Comanche as he quoted from different sources. These papers reference tribal agreements your people have never seen. The town council members exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected a simple arrest, not a public trial. McClure's desperation finally showed. Even if the papers are real, they don't prove I killed anyone. Actually, they do. Miriam unfolded Thomas's final letter. He wrote to Judge Martinez about threats against his life. Specific threats from you, Sheriff. Let me see that. McClure lunged for the letter, but Chayton intercepted him. The two men grappled briefly before the Comanche warriors closed in. Enough! The new voice cut through the chaos like a blade. A lone rider approached from the east, his horse lathered with sweat from hard travel. The man wore a federal marshal's badge and carried papers bearing territorial seals. Marshal Crawford, McClure's voice cracked slightly. This is unexpected. I received an urgent message about fraudulent land sales and possible murder. Crawford's eyes swept the gathered crowd. Seems I arrived just in time. Chayton nodded toward one of his warriors. My cousin moves fast when necessary. Crawford dismounted and approached Miriam. You have evidence to present, Mrs. Solomon? She handed over Thomas's letters and documents. The marshal read quickly, his expression growing darker with each page. These are serious allegations. They're all true. Ayanna stepped forward. We can translate any part you need explained. Crawford studied the boy with surprise. You read Spanish colonial law, and territorial statutes, and Comanche land agreements. For the next hour, the boys demonstrated their extraordinary knowledge. They translated documents, explained legal precedents, and recited territorial regulations from memory. Their testimony built an unshakable foundation under Miriam's accusations. McClure tried repeatedly to discredit them, but his efforts only highlighted his own ignorance of the laws he was supposed to enforce. Sheriff McClure, you're under arrest for fraud, theft of territorial lands, and suspicion of murder. Crawford produced shackles from his saddlebags. Your men are free to go, provided they cooperate with the investigation. McClure's deputies dropped their weapons without protest. Loyalty only extended so far when federal charges were involved. As Crawford secured the prisoner, Councilman Harris approached Miriam with obvious reluctance. Mrs. Solomon, the town council would like to apologize for any misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? We were acting on incomplete information. Miriam looked at the man who had threatened to drive her from her home just days earlier. His transformation was remarkable in its speed and completeness. The information was there all along. You just chose not to see it. Perhaps we could discuss compensation for your troubles. Perhaps you could discuss that with my lawyer. Miriam gestured toward Marshal Crawford. I'll be filing formal complaints against the entire council. Harris paled and retreated hastily. As the sun climbed higher, the crowd began to disperse. The Comanche warriors melted away into the landscape as silently as they had appeared. The town council members slunk back toward Bitter Creek, their authority shattered. Only Miriam, Chayton, and the boys remained with Marshal Crawford as he prepared to transport his prisoner. You'll need to testify in Tucson. We'll be there. Crawford looked at the three boys with obvious admiration. Remarkable children. They'll make fine lawyers someday. They already are. Miriam put her arms around their shoulders. They just don't have the official papers yet. The trial in Tucson lasted 3 days. Judge Martinez presided with the gravity of a man who understood the historical importance of the case. McClure's network of corruption unraveled thread by thread as witnesses testified to years of stolen lands and forged documents. The boys served as translators and expert witnesses, their knowledge astounding the packed courtroom. Ayanna read Spanish colonial law with the precision of a trained lawyer. Keme explained territorial boundaries with maps drawn from memory. Tala recited conversations word for word, his recall so perfect that even McClure's defense attorney stopped challenging him. Guilty on all counts. Judge Martinez's gavel fell with finality. 20 years hard labor, plus restitution to all affected parties. McClure's empire crumbled in a single afternoon. Dozens of fraudulent land sales were overturned. properties returned to their rightful owners. Both tribal lands and legitimate settler claims were restored according to proper territorial law. Miriam found herself the legal owner of water rights worth more than most people saw in a lifetime. The mineral deposits beneath her property could fund development projects for decades, but the real transformation happened on the journey home. What will you do with all that wealth? Chayton rode beside her wagon as they returned to Bitter Creek. Build something better. Such as? A school, a trading post, a place where different peoples can work together instead of fighting. Chayton smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. My mother would approve of that vision. The boys chattered excitedly in the wagon bed, switching between languages as they planned their future. They spoke of books they wanted to read, subjects they hoped to study, bridges they could build between their two worlds. Bitter Creek had changed in their absence. Word of the trial results had spread quickly. The town council had resigned in disgrace. New leaders were emerging, people who understood that prosperity required cooperation rather than oppression. Mrs. Henderson met them at the store, her face bright with nervous hope. Miriam, the ladies' auxiliary would like to host a welcome home dinner. That's kind of you. We also wanted to discuss the school project. Several families are interested in enrolling their children. Miriam studied the woman who had once called the boys savages. People could change when their survival depended on it. All children will be welcome. Within a month, construction began on the new trading post and school. Miriam used her mineral rights as collateral for loans that funded the ambitious project. The building rose from the desert like hope made manifest. Chayton proved invaluable as a partner. His connections with tribal communities brought trade that doubled the town's prosperity within a year. His knowledge of the land helped establish sustainable farming practices that turned desert into productive soil. The boys threw themselves into their studies with renewed vigor. They devoured books on law, engineering, medicine, and agriculture. Their unique perspective as bridges between cultures made them natural leaders among their peers. You realize what you've accomplished. Judge Martinez visited during the school's dedication ceremony. This is the first integrated institution in the territory. Integration was never the goal. Miriam watched children of different backgrounds learning together in the new classrooms. Understanding was the goal. Integration is just what happens when people truly see each other. The ceremony drew visitors from across the territory. Tribal leaders sat beside territorial officials. Former enemies found common ground in their children's futures. Ayana, now 13 and already reading law books at an advanced level, delivered the dedication speech in 3 languages. His words about unity and shared prosperity moved grown men to tears. Education belongs to everyone who seeks it. His young voice carried across the gathered crowd. Knowledge has no color, no tribe, no boundaries except the ones we create in our minds. 2 years later, the first graduates of the Bitter Creek Academy left to attend universities in the East. They carried with them not just academic knowledge, but the lived experience of successful cooperation between peoples. Miriam and Chayton married in a quiet ceremony that blended traditions from both their backgrounds. The boys, now young men, served as witnesses to vows spoken in English and Comanche. Their wedding marked the beginning of a new chapter, but not the end of their work. The trading post expanded into a regional hub that connected tribal communities with territorial markets on fair terms. The school grew into an academy that attracted students from hundreds of miles away. Most importantly, their success proved that alternatives to conflict were possible. Do you ever regret taking us in? Kimi asked during a family dinner, celebrating his acceptance to law school. Miriam looked around the table at the faces of her chosen family. Chayton, whose strength had become her foundation. The 3 boys who had grown into remarkable young men. The extended community of students and partners who filled their lives with purpose. That was the best decision I ever made. Even when the whole town turned against you? Especially then. Sometimes the right choice looks like the impossible choice until you actually make it. Years passed like seasons, each one building on the foundation they had established. The academy produced lawyers, doctors, engineers, and teachers. The trading post became a model for fair commerce that other communities replicated. Bitter Creek transformed from a dying frontier town into a thriving center of multicultural cooperation. But the true measure of their success wasn't economic or educational. It was the simple fact that children of different backgrounds played together in the streets without thinking anything unusual about it. Miriam stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun set over the community she had helped create. Chayton joined her, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders. Your husband would be proud. Thomas started something he never got to see finished. But you finished it? We all finished it. Together. In the distance, laughter echoed from the school where evening classes were ending. Young voices called goodbyes in multiple languages, their words weaving together like threads in a tapestry. The Black Widow had indeed changed a warrior's life. But more than that, she had changed the lives of everyone who believed that understanding was stronger than hatred, that cooperation was more powerful than conflict, and that the future belonged to those brave enough to build it together.